Hi there, I'm Claudia. Today we'll continue our exploration of Jupyter Notebooks from where we left off last time. In the previous video, we looked at how to start a Jupyter Notebook, and we also looked at what Jupyter Notebook architecture is like, how this application was designed, and why it's so different from other applications that you might be used to using, such as Microsoft Excel, for example. If you missed that video, go ahead and check it out. You'll find the link in the description below. In this video, we'll talk about how to write and run code in a Jupyter Notebook. We'll also look at how Jupyter Notebook behaves when writing and running code. And finally, we'll also look at 3 important benefits that Jupyter Notebooks offer over other Python development environments, such as iPython and some text editors. For more in-depth tutorials, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, and also don't forget to hit the bell. That's going to let you know when the next video comes out, and you're not going to want to miss that. All right, let's dive in. Next, we're going to look at some examples and understand how to write and run code in Jupyter Notebook. I have here a few examples to get us started. I have a print function. I have some simple arithmetic here, a simple function definition, and then calling set function. Let's see what happens in each case. First of all, if we start with a selected cell and we want to write code in it, the first thing we need to do is to click inside the cell. This will convert the cell to edit mode, and we're now able to write and run code in it. In this particular cell, I already have a print function that's ready, typed up, and ready to go. Now, one thing that I'd like you to notice here, notice the handy little syntax highlighting where the word print is highlighted in green, whereas the input of the function is in red. This makes it easier to write code as well as read code in Jupyter Notebook. Next, let's move on to see how we can run this line of code. To run this line of code, what we need to do is use our keyboard to type Shift and Enter. Hitting Shift and Enter on the keyboard will run the code as well as select the cell immediately beneath that. Now that we've run this line of code, what do we see? We see that the output is visible right here underneath the cell. Hello there, I'm Claudia is the input of this print function, and it's now the output underneath the cell. One thing to note here is that it's important to hit both the Shift and the Enter keys at the same time in order to run a line of code. Let's move on to this other cell and see what happens if I just hit Enter. Well, great. Now I have another line that is numbered inside this code cell, and I can, of course, go ahead and write more code here. But if I just wanted to run this line of code here, this line of arithmetic, then I'm just out of luck. So it's important to type both Shift and Enter at the same time. So far, we've seen what happens when we run a print function, which has an output that is printed to the console here. So the output gets printed immediately underneath the code cell. And we've also seen what happens when we run some simple arithmetic, 2 plus 2 times 4 plus 5. A few things to note here about the simple arithmetic. The Jupyter Notebook Python works exactly the same way as Python works on your system, the same way as iPython works. So everything is exactly the same. The order of operations is the same. That means that the operation in between parentheses gets executed first, then the multiplication to the 2, and finally the outer operation, the outer addition, gets executed. After the operations are executed, the output is printed underneath. An interesting thing to note here, which is different from this print function up here, is the fact that we also get this extra prompt here that says out and has the square brackets with the 2 inside it. This is here to indicate that this is the output of code that was executed right above here. So this is the input line and this is the output line. Now, what's up with this number in between the square brackets? We've seen it up here in the first cell. We're seeing it again here. The first cell has a 1, the second cell has a 2. This number is here to indicate the order in which the cells were run. So if I wanted to run this cell again, for example, now there's a 3 inside. What that means is that this is the third operation that was executed. Even though we only have 2 lines of code, because I ran this one twice, this one now has a 3 to indicate the fact that it was indeed run twice. Let's move on to the next example. In this next cell here, the next example, we have a very simple function definition, which we define using the def keyword. This function is pretty simple. It only spans 2 lines, and what it does is it takes 2 inputs, so 2 numbers, A and B, and it returns the sum of A and B. I showed you earlier that in order to write multiple lines of code inside a cell in Jupyter, all you have to do is press enter, so no shift, just enter, and that will enter a new line of code. So this is what I did here. And let's see what happens when I run this cell. As you can see, running this cell didn't actually produce an output, right? Why is that? Well, there was nothing to output. All we asked Python to do in this case was to define this function, which is called doMath. And within this function definition, we wanted to include the instructions to return the result of the addition between A and B. That's it. That's all we wanted it to do. There's nothing to output, nothing to print, no result so far. The only thing that has changed when we ran the cell is that now there's a 4 here and in between the square brackets, which means that this cell was run and it is the 4th operation that we executed within this Jupyter notebook. Let's see what happens when we call this function. Running the cell to call the function doMath with the inputs 1 and 2 actually yields another output line very similar to the one that we see up here, and this output line has the result 3, which is the correct result of 1 plus 2. One thing to note here is that this is not actually normal Python behavior. If you've ever used Python to write a script, so to create a .py file and then run it, you'll know that typically defining a function like this, such as the doMath function, and calling that function is not actually going to produce an output. In order to get this output, so after you call doMath with the inputs 1 and 2, in order to get the output 3, you would actually have to include an extra line of code, for example, a print function, to explicitly tell Python, hey, I want you to print this result, which the function doMath returns. Otherwise, in and of itself, the return keyword does not automatically print the result of something to your console. But in this case, we do see here 3, which is the correct result returned by the doMath function. This particular result is something that Jupyter Notebook does. It's showing you this answer here, an extra special feature that Jupyter Notebook offers. Jupyter here is trying to be extra helpful, and it's saying, okay, well, I know that you wanted to run this function. It doesn't technically ask me to return anything, but since there is a result being returned by this function, you should probably see it. So as a result of that, the 3 gets outputted to the console, and it gets output the same way that this 20 up here was output when we ran this simple arithmetic here. Finally, we again see that we got the number of the operation being run, as Jupyter keeps track of all of the operations you run, and that is 5. So this is the 5th line of code that we ran here. Just from these 4 simple examples, you're probably already starting to see some of the big benefits of using Jupyter Notebook. The first and most immediate benefit that you might have noticed is just the instant gratification of running Python code in Jupyter Notebook. You get to see the result output right away, immediately underneath the code that you ran, whether or not you requested that, right? As we saw here with the function definition, sure, we didn't get an output when we ran the function definition, but when we called the function immediately underneath, we got an output even though we didn't explicitly ask Python to print the output. We only just returned it within that function. In addition to the instant gratification of immediate output, which is something that we also see with iPython, Jupyter Notebook actually allows you to write code on multiple lines as well. This, of course, is not something that you get with iPython. One example is defining this function which spans 2 lines. By just hitting enter inside a code cell in Jupyter Notebook, you can actually write multiple lines of code and execute them at the same time. You can create reusable functions, you can write little scripts, so on and so forth. A third benefit that we get with Jupyter Notebook that iPython in particular does not offer is the benefit of syntax highlighting. All the code that I've written here, all of the code examples have syntax highlighting. The word print is highlighted, the numbers and the operators are highlighted here. The word def, the word return, the function name is highlighted nicely. So all of the code examples that you see here are highlighted the same way that they would be in a development environment. All right, that's it for today. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and hit that notification button while you're at it too, so you don't miss any of the new videos that are coming up soon. If you want even more in-depth tutorials on Python and the latest AI technologies, also feel free to check our blog at edlitera.com/blog, and that link is also going to be included in the description. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.